Right, Chairman, to discuss this further, we are now being joined by Alex Zdan, live from Washington, D.C. He's a Republican Strategist, award-winning investigative journalist and writer, and also former Republican contestant for the U.S. Senate. And he's joining us live on the show. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, the big news coming in for the Republican camp is that they have won the battleground state of North Carolina, and Trump seems to have taken an edge in the remaining battleground states, debarring Nevada. In 2020, he had only won North Carolina and he had lost all the other battleground states. How do you see this massive win for Trump in the race to the White House? Do you think he's replicating his 2016 win?
Well, obviously, North Carolina going for Trump is a very good sign.
Yes.
We are going down the right path. We are not anywhere near at the end of the path yet. It's still nighttime over here in the United States, and it will be a while, probably sunrise, before we have a little bit more clarity in the way things are going. But clearly, former President Trump is in the driver's seat right now of this election campaign. North Carolina, it certainly was probably going to go for him, but the interesting thing about North Carolina is there was a great deal of controversy over the Republican nominee for governor. The Democrat won the governor's race in North Carolina earlier tonight by a very large margin, yet President Trump was still able to grab that state and put it in his column. So the former president looking very strong in his march to retake the White House, but still quite a lot of counting and quite a lot of results that need to come in, but I'm cautiously optimistic at this moment in time.
Cautiously optimistic, Alex. I think you've worded it correctly, because that is essentially what any seasoned individual would be at this point. Not too early to celebrate, because the gap that we saw, which was almost like at a double figure that Trump was enjoying at this point earlier in the day, that has reduced. And and that is a trend which we also saw about 4 years ago. Something our Voice of America correspondent had highlighted, that even 4 years ago, we saw that the American map was more red, and then eventually the blue started ticking up, and Biden was announced the winner, because those are the counts which come in earlier, where the Republicans are in the lead. Similarly, we've seen it again happening today. As of now, do you feel how optimistic are you for the other battleground states where Trump is in the lead, marginally though?
Sure, I'll say this. The difference, a large difference, between this year and 2020 is that Republicans have embraced early voting. So many Republicans in my state and elsewhere went out and voted early, and those votes, to my understanding, have been counted, and they're part of these totals. They are part of these leads that President Trump is building up in other states. Let's talk about the remaining states on the board. Pennsylvania, I am very optimistic about, because former President Trump has spent a great deal of time there. He has that connection with the people of Butler, Pennsylvania. He served McDonald's in Bucks County. That's an unbelievable link to that battleground state. Georgia, he appears to be ahead. He's in a very good position in Arizona, potentially even in Michigan. So I like a lot of what I'm seeing on the board as of right now.
Alex, talking about Michigan and Pennsylvania, apart from being the blue wall states, they also have deep union roots in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. They have heavy manufacturing union heavy states. How do you think, and we've seen how Trump and Harris, both of them, have tried to woo that voter base. How do you see Trump faring in on that aspect?
Well, this has been a factor since President Trump ran the first time in 2016, and it's only accelerated since then. The unions have a split. The top echelon, the union membership, making $700,000, $800,000 a year, they like Democrats. The union rank and file almost overwhelmingly go for Republicans, especially for a guy like former President Trump, who was called the blue-collar billionaire because when he was working with those folks who were building his skyscrapers in Manhattan, he was the one that had a connection with those regular Joe workers. He's always appealed to those blue-collar individuals. Sometimes they voted Democrat in the past, but they've come back to the Republican Party for former President Trump in a big way. I think that is another key to those blue wall states. He's certainly chipping away at that Democratic blue wall, and it could be falling before sunrise.
Alex, when it comes to abortion, Trump has struggled to find a consistent message there, and Harris' stance has been clear since everyone knew that before she even became the presidential nominee. I wanted to understand how much do you feel that can swing it back in favor of the Blues at this point?
Well, I'll say this. Former President Trump, J.D. Vance were both clear. America should not, in their view, have a national abortion ban from the federal government. This is a states' rights issue, and that fact was decided by the Supreme Court, not Donald Trump, not any president. The Supreme Court threw abortion back to the states. Vice President Harris was clearly using abortion as a wedge issue, as a fear-mongering issue to drive up that fear among women that Republicans were coming for these particular rights that people say that they enjoy. But it's pretty clear that President Trump was able to cut through the noise with that crystal clear declaration that a federal abortion ban is off the table in a second Trump administration. And I think that played a big role in what you're seeing tonight.
But Mr. Alex, abortion and reproductive rights is something that has resonated massively amongst the women voters in the race this time around, and that is why we're seeing a massive gender gap in this year's election race. What do you have to say on that aspect? Because preserving democracy and economy, these were the two pivotal issues that dominated on the top of the agenda of every voter. While economy is and immigration is something that has gone on Trump's side, preserving democracy is something on which the American voters favor Kamala Harris.
Well, the gender gap was there before the Supreme Court made its Dobbs decision in 2022. You're seeing a continuation of something that has already existed. I think that it also has to do with a lot of the messages that the parties put out to their individual voters or the people that they're trying to bring over to their side. That's a part of the reason that the gender gap has been caused in this country. I don't think it's just abortion. However, the Republican message, strong families, strong nation, strong bank account with a prosperous economy, that resonates with everybody. But obviously right now, when we look at the gender gap, it's resonating even more with men. But when you look at former President Trump's signature issues like the economy and immigration, there's no gender divide there. A healthy economy is a healthy economy for everyone, and a safe country is a safe country for everybody.
Alex, I just want to draw out a certain irony that I find here. On the global scale, it is a matter of pride that Trump wears on his shoulder that, there were no wars when he was president of the US. And that is something the entire world has seen and will acknowledge. But on the other hand, when you see internally inside the US, Trump has been a staunch he has a defender of the Second Amendment, the constitutional right to bear arms. And we have seen the number of mass shootings that have taken place inside the US. Do you feel that takes away from his stance inside the US or his chances of reaching the Oval Office?
Well, for you to compare a war begun by a terrorist group or a madman like
it's not a comparison, but there is peace on one side and there is action on the other.
It's completely off base, completely and totally.
No,
off
there's
base.
no comparison there. There's no
They're
comparison.
not even in the same universe.
But peace has to be achieved on both
talk
sides. That's what I'm bringing out. That's just what I'm trying to highlight here. So I'm just
Certainly.
trying to understand.
I absolutely don't see the connection between the Second Amendment and wars overseas. And when you talk about these horrific mass shootings that have happened in American schools,
Yes.
They happened long before President Trump came on the political scene. We're going to do whatever we can to stop those horrific mass shootings from happening. But for you to suggest that it's former President Trump's fault is just outrageous.
Right, Mr. Alex, apart from that, let's also talk about the urban-rural divide, which is perhaps impacting the presidential race. And with growing young, educated American voters, which have preferred Harris, do you think that will somewhat jeopardize Trump's win for the White House?
Well, again, you bring up the urban-rural divide, and that's an absolutely appropriate divide to bring up because it's been around since the country was founded. Since the 1700s, when we were mostly an agrarian economy with a handful of cities. But the real divide in this country right now is between those with college degrees and those without college degrees. And we have seen this trend accelerating for years, that people without college degrees or with a belief like I have, that you learn knowledge from life and life experiences, not necessarily from sitting through courses in colleges, those folks gravitate towards the Republican Party and the Republican message. And those folks who go to college because they believe that they need to see life through that lens, that college-educated lens, they so often become Democrats. But that's where the Democrats have run into a great deal of trouble with these overeducated academics pushing woke philosophies that average people recoil from. There's this insular ivory tower attitude of academia that the Democratic Party has fallen prey to, and I think that's another reason that people are leaving the Democratic Party and embracing the Republican message.
Mr. Alex, just to add to that point, there is split among white voters by education. White voters with college degrees, they are siding for Harris. Meanwhile, white voters without college degrees is what is essentially a Trump voter base. But please stay with us, because we also have with us our correspondent,